Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Wong, Director of the USC Center on Public Diplomacy. It is my pleasure to welcome you to CPD Conversations. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. For our audience, your setup is listen-only mode for the duration of the program. Please submit your questions to our speakers by using the question tab in your control panel. You may do that at any time during the program, and we will address them during the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please email cpd@usc.edu. In today's program, we take a look at the World Expo, for some better known as the World's Fair. The next World Expo will open this Friday in Dubai and run through March 31st, 2022. This discussion is part of a multi-year project at the Center on Public Diplomacy that examines the contemporary relevance and significance of the World Expo to nations' soft power and their engagement with the world. The project began in 2010 with the Expo in Shanghai, followed by Expo 2015 Milan. For Expo 2020 Dubai, we will address the same sets of research questions as in the previous two expos. We hope the project will present valuable comparisons across 3 consecutive expos on soft power in action through this enormous cultural event. In today's discussion, we will explore how technological mediation serves as a critical mechanism for public engagement at the Expo. Of course, technology has always been central to the Expo. The Expo has been the site for showcasing technological advances over the years, and nations weave innovation and technology into the narrative of their pavilions. Meanwhile, technological mediation is also manifested in visitors' experience on the Expo grounds. For the Dubai Expo, technological affordances will most likely be particularly salient in the context of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So how does technology facilitate a nation's storytelling at the World Expo? Joining me for the panel discussion are Anne Balsamo, a professor of arts and humanities at the University of Texas at Dallas, and Yoav Dubinsky, instructor of sports business at the University of Oregon's College of Business. Each of us will give brief remarks. We'll then have a conversation among the 3 of us to further explore some of the topics surfaced in our comments. Afterwards, we'll take questions from the audience. I'll start by highlighting 3 things about the Dubai Expo: its diverse character, global range, and the many technological possibilities. It will be the first time in Expo's 170-year history for the event to be held in the Middle East. While it will not be the most attended Expo in history, as Shanghai will hold on to the record set in 2010 with 73 million visitors, the Dubai Expo is expected to attract the most internationally diverse audience of any previous Expo. This coincides with the rise of a global middle class, especially in emerging economies, that is expanding its interactions with the world through work, leisure, and travel. In a mid-pandemic world, this diverse gathering of countries and people en masse constitutes a singular global communal moment. The Dubai Expo at an inflection point of shared interruptive challenges. The Expo itself exemplifies both global and national consciousness. It has always reflected the underlying landscape of international relations, and national identity both of the pavilion and the visitor is rendered visible and salient at the Expo. Granted, this event, by its very nature, presents narratives that are decidedly optimistic and selective. Some may argue that such public engagement is superficial at best, as they point to national pavilions as pandering tourist fare and the visitor experiences as being shallow. But our research has shown that when done well, the experiences created by the pavilions, while brief, are meaningful and memorable for visitors and can even be transformational. It is in the space of the pavilion that people and ideas from different countries and cultures become linked and connected. The spectacles of national pavilions forge a physical sense of the diversity of human experiences. The most significant set of economic and ecological challenges in our times is not divisible between domestic and international boundaries. In these times of uncertainty and division, the Dubai Expo offers us a much needed moment and space to reignite public imagination and our belief in human agency. Moreover, the World Expo embodies the technology of storytelling in vivid ways, from architectural experimentations to multisensory extravagances. The pandemic is poised to change some of the fundamental practices of the Expo that will endure in the years to come. Even before the pandemic, our digital life started to interact ever more with the physical realm. In our growingly tech-infused world, there seems to be craving for a sense of place and a sense of conviviality that an in-person event like the Expo provides. Physical presence remains a more elemental form of communication and a transcultural human condition. This is now particularly poignant for many of us. National and individual isolations over the past year have accentuated the need to recover our senses of space and place. While we seek genuine person-to-person contact, our lives have also been normalized into contactless and socially distanced existence during the pandemic. How to forge compelling and meaningful interactions on the Expo ground is a new, daunting challenge. The Expo begins as a place-based attraction, but advancements in digital technology are upending how people experience and enjoy the event. Think about all the selfie and TikTok moments and Instagrammable places as visitors are empowered by mobile technology and a 5G network. The Expo will become less a closed and a choreographed physical space, but a more fluid, expansive one where visitor experiences are increasingly transmedia and are instantaneously shared beyond Expo grounds. As we explore the many possibilities of digital technology to create new experiences of gathering, the Dubai Expo may very well turn out to be a hothouse experiment for making sense of how the boundaries of the World Expo will be redrawn and redefined, how our changing expectations of narrative formats and narrative platforms will shape visitor experiences, and how data and analytics will power the creation of hybrid experiences that embody connectivity between the physical and the digital. So I conclude with my brief remarks. I would now like to invite Anne Balsamo to share her remarks. Anne is a scholar, educator, entrepreneur, and designer of new media who has published multiple works exploring cultural possibilities of emergent media technologies. She is Distinguished University Chair of Arts and Humanities at the University of Texas at Dallas. Previously, she served as Dean of the School of Media Studies at the New School in New York City. And the floor is yours. I turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jay, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm moving all my screens around, and I think Valeria has my slides. So if you could go ahead and put up my first slide. There we go. So this is a kind of a report on research that was done around the Shanghai World Expo in 2010. And it was done with my colleague, Kara Wallace, who's an alumna of the Annenberg School of Communication at USC, and also now a full professor at Texas A&M. We spent 3 years, or did the research over 3 years, in Shanghai, first in 2009, when we spent almost a month there, kind of watching how things were getting ready, some of the kind of publicity or advertising that was going on and communication going on about getting the city ready for the big event. And then we spent a month during the event in 2010, documenting what is kind of typically understood as field research, documenting the various pavilions and the technologies on offer. And then we returned in 2011 for 3 weeks to see what remained of the very large kind of installation or the extravaganza of 2010. Let me remind you that the Shanghai World Expo had the theme of better cities, better living. And we reported on this research in an article called Public Interactive, Soft Power, and China's Future at and Beyond the 2010 Shanghai World Expo. I think Stacy may be sharing a link to that. In the article, and actually in our research, we focused on 3 pavilions, the 3 largest pavilions, not necessarily the 3 kind of most expensive pavilions. Certainly 2 of them were, but not necessarily all of them. And I'm going to just walk through, just with 3 slides, just very quick snapshots of each of the 3 pavilions. So let me start with, and you can go to the next slide, the Chinese pavilion. It was certainly the largest pavilion, not only in square feet, 1.722 million square feet. It was centrally located in a very kind of symbolic kind of siting on the kind of the expansive expo grounds. There was a side pavilion, so there was a second pavilion that featured exhibitions about each of the provinces, but the one that we focused on was called the, or referred to as the Oriental Crown. Its theme was Chinese wisdom in urban development, kind of keeping with the overall theme of better cities, better living. This pavilion, as many do, presents the central story, and in this case of the host nation. There were several interactive experiences on offer among the highest tech as well as kind of the low tech. And you'll see, and I'll focus on this one specifically. I wish I had video, but we didn't have time for video. The highest tech kind of video or experience that really made an impact on the kind of many visitors, the millions of visitors, was a enlargement of a very important scroll, and you'll forgive my pronunciation, but it's along the river during the Qingming festival. And where the original scroll is very small, it's about a foot by 17 feet, the scroll that was projected onto an undulating wall in the pavilion was 720 feet long and 21 feet high. On the painting, there were different scenes that were animated, showing kind of life along the river with different animated characters and kind of different events that were happening during the festival. Now, the scale of this experience is in keeping with what we saw as an emerging technology played out in many kind of pavilions at the expo, which is an emerging technology that then we may have referred to as expansive cinema, or kind of cinema kind of beyond the scale of the human. This is kind of the cinema scale of IMAX theaters, or cinema that is kind of used in different ways to multiply frames or to spread across kind of large and long vistas. This was an incredibly engaging experience, and it had a very interesting kind of impact in terms of the visitor's body. That although the characters who were animated were not quite at the scale of those who would be watching or moving along, the characters were getting nearer to kind of human body size. And so there's a sense in which this public interactive, which is a kind of a technology that is designed to bring people into kind of engagement. And they are what we would consider a new genre, and it is a platform for innovative storytelling, and they provide the architecture for a particular kind of engagement that is mediated through technology. In the context of the expo, we considered public interactives such as the animated scroll as technologies of persuasion that were inviting kind of visitors to move into the experience and place themselves in that context. Now, just as point of contrast, another very popular, very popular kind of exhibit in the Chinese pavilion was I guess framed under the topic of reminiscing, and it featured 5 dioramas the lowest tech perhaps of different, the kind of scene of different households over each of 5 years. And keeping up with or drawing on Jay's comment, it was very much telling the story of the increasing prosperity on offer for Chinese citizens, the rising middle class, and inviting people to step in front of the dioramas because they were human scale. And people could they weren't quite taking selfies back then, but they could take pictures of themselves juxtaposed in front of these dioramas. So we can go to the next slide. So then the second pavilion that we examined in depth was the one mounted by the United States. Its theme was Rising to the Challenge. It was the third largest, so it wasn't small by any ways, but it certainly wasn't as big as the other two. It had as its kind of architectural theme or layout was an eagle with outspread wings. Its main attraction was a 4D film called The Garden that told the story of a young girl who kind of experiences or plants a garden to kind of overcome some of the blight that she sees in her neighborhood. And the garden then becomes a kind of a gathering point for kind of diverse members of kind of nearby communities. Now, this was 4D in the sense that it included lighting, special lighting effects, mists, and vibrating seats. So involving kind of the audience's body in kind of one more dimension than is typical for a cinematic experience. There are 5 screens, 30 feet tall. Like I said, lots of special effects. Now, this one was different kind of in the comparison is that all the people were quite, pictured in the cinematic kind of treatment, were quite large and kind of overwhelming. You see a shot there of kind of these faces. They were bigger than life and certainly bigger than those who were sitting in the audience. I will tell you that this was not a very well reviewed pavilion. And I mean, even up until months before, there was a lot of criticism of the US pavilion. And it was partly the criticism was the lack of government investment in the pavilion, which kind of would have required an act of Congress to appropriate the money. And there was kind of a very kind of intense recession going on at the time. So this pavilion was 100% supported by corporate funders. And it showed because at every turn you saw a corporate branding effort. So the idea here was very much kind of the story about the United States and its kind of corporate citizens who all kind of have kind of the rights or the privilege of branding the experience of the story of the United States. It was also likened to a mall and not in a kind of positive way. Let's just say that. Okay, the next, let's see, the next slide. And this is my last slide because I know I don't have much time. So can we go to the next slide, which should be the Saudi Arabia? Oh, you're there. Okay, excellent. Now this, we will say, was a spectacular pavilion. It was definitely received as that. It was spectacular for many reasons, not only its kind of size. It was 64,000 square feet. It had three distinct experiences that in very wonderful architectural ways brought visitors into the story of kind of the theme of the pavilion, which was about the relationship, the longstanding kind of trade and partnership relationship between Saudi Arabia and China. The architectural form was referred to as the moon ship. People likened it to kind of the architectural kind of silhouette of an oil tanker. As you walked into the pavilion, visitors kind of walked up a set of stairs that presented various photographs, so low-tech photographs documenting the relationship along the Silk Road, the history of the Silk Road, to come to the main central kind of public interactive experience on offer, which was called The Treasure. If you have not seen it, go to YouTube and see it. It was a immersive IMAX cinema, almost 360 degrees, which meant that it's the ceiling as well as the floor. Visitors were moved through this dynamic painting, cinematic kind of montage. They were moved through it in a conveyor belt. And so the idea, the poetics of kind of people, if not kind of walking on their own, but being kind of moved through this cinematic experience that kind of showed the absolute beauty of Saudi Arabia in all its diversity. It was removed from the Shanghai site in 2016. It had stayed for quite a time after, because it was really a spectacular thing. And it was rebuilt and relocated. So it is still up and running. It was gifted to the Chinese government from Saudi Arabia in recognition of the enduring value of their kind of partnership, both trade and cultural. So as we looked, again, these are the kind of the themes that we were considering, was how did these public interactives that were kind of embedded in these different pavilions, how did they stage the story of the nation? How did they bring people into that story using what was then emerging technology, expansive cinema? And what was the relationship of the visitor's body as a kind of the shell of the experience of the person? What was the relationship of the visitor's body kind of to the bigger than life experiences on offer through these cinematic moments? So I think that is my last slide. So in that, I will say thank you.
Hi everyone. So thank you. I'm Dr. Yoav Dubinsky. I'm an instructor of sports business at the University of Oregon, the Longquest College of Business. I'm also a research fellow at the USC Center for Public Diplomacy, and in the past, for over a decade, I've been covering and researching the Olympic movement. To the Beijing Olympics from Beijing, the 2008 Olympics from Beijing, 2012 from London, 2016 from Rio, and recently came back from Tokyo after conducting research there and doing a project with the Center for Public Diplomacy on sports tech diplomacy, the intersection between sports, technology, diplomacy, and nation branding, and the Tokyo Olympics. And I wanted to share some of the intersections between sports, technology, diplomacy, and nation branding through the evolution of the Olympic Games and through the Tokyo Olympics. Valeria, next slide, please. So much of my research focuses on the Olympic movement, also on Israel and on the US, but focusing a lot on the Olympic movement through the lenses of nation branding and public diplomacy. And I wanted to kind of start a bit to put to contextualize the role of technology in the evolution of the Olympic movement. Because when we're talking about, because the way that I see it and divide the evolution of the Olympic movement, I look at 5 and now 6 different eras. And if we're looking at the first era, the revival of the Olympic movements from Athens, basically to World War I, the role of nation branding and public diplomacy was pretty minor because these were pretty minor events, the Olympic Games. At that period, they were either swallowed or even piggybacked. The World Fair in Paris and St. Louis and the British Franco exhibition as well. So at that point of time, the Olympic movement was relatively small. But after World War I and until World War II, The Olympic movement started to gain momentum. Different manifestation of public diplomacy and nation branding started to manifest through exclusion of countries, up until, of course, the 1936 Olympics, where Hitler used them and Nazi Germany used them for proper public diplomacy purposes. Straightforward, using quite a lot of quite new technology in doing so, including first live TV coverage of the games, using the cinema, Leni Riefenstahl, and Olympia, to establish or to showcase, especially internally, to German people how structured Germany can be under the governance of the Nazi regime. Also, of course, using the military parade and SS soldiers in the streets. So we're starting to see that type of use of technology to enhance public diplomacy and nation branding. And in this case, unfortunately, not with Nazi Germany. After World War II, new countries received independence. We're starting to see the Olympic movement becoming much more international, and with the evolution of television and broadcasting, host countries and participating countries and different stakeholders are using the evolution of the technology of broadcasting to try and achieve different social, political, and economic goals. We're seeing Japan using the '64 Olympics to change the image, change the narrative of the country, introducing the bullet train, introducing satellite television, satellite broadcasting, and repositioning itself from a devastated country after World War II to a technological powerhouse. We are seeing the evolution of broadcasting manifesting with pressure groups such as the Black Power salute in Mexico City, of protesting racial injustice in the US, and 4 years later, not a peaceful protest, a terror attack in Munich regarding the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, followed, of course, by mass boycotts of African countries of Montreal, the US, and 60 countries of Moscow, and the retaliation of the boycott in '84. The LA Olympics, which leads to a commercialized era, as the LA Olympics was the first privately funded Olympics, transitioning to a very different era of the Olympic movement, leading to top sponsors, to the role of corporate diplomacy, of private sponsorship in the late 80s and 90s, along with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. The US, the capitalist system, took over the Olympic movement, also with the abolishment of amateurism, which by that ended as more money came into the movement, but also more corruption came into the movement as well, including the Salt Lake City bid. And in the 2000s, we're starting to see another level of use of technology, of innovation, or for a legacy-oriented perception of the games, of not just making a profit, but looking at it at long run, whether it's China who's using the games to establish itself as a powerhouse, or London using the games for green energy and renovation of London, of East London. I argue that at this point we are entering a new era, not just because of COVID, but because of other social, political, and economic aspects. And with the postponement of the Tokyo Olympic Games, that's a landmark of a new era of the Olympic movement. Valeria, next slide, please. Because the Tokyo Olympics, they started with one narrative in mind, which was the reconstruction gained of the Fukushima disaster, of the tsunami, the earthquake of 2011, and due to the pandemic, shifted narrative several times. At first trying to showcase that the world will reunite and celebrate a victory over the pandemic. And then when that did not happen, so focusing on a narrative that the games must go on and manage to go on for the athletes despite the pandemic. And to get there, many there was need for different technological innovations, including usage of a variety of mobile applications, such as for contact tracing, for to try and contain and to contain COVID to some extent. There was digital engagement from corporate partners and corporate sponsors, such as Toshiba, such as Toyota. One of the issues, of course, of not having fans there, neither local or international, was very limited in-person initiatives, such as Olympic houses, or limited ability to see what Tokyo could offer beyond just the competition, because most of the experience in the Tokyo Olympics that people received was through broadcasting, and a lot of backlash that that started before the game, during the games, and also after, very much questioning the branding of Japan as a technological powerhouse, if that, especially in the way of handling the pandemic and not being able to contain it before the games. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yoav. Thank you. And we are going to address some of the questions from the audience, and also we have questions for each other. Perhaps let me start first. There's a question about, and what you talked about, the public interactives. And you've studied the Shanghai Expo, but you also done lots of work on public interactives, beyond the Expo, program, in our cities and, in our public spaces. What sort of things you've learned from those type of public interactives that may have implications, about the Expo presentations and how public interacts with them, and what you have seen in those types of public interactives in recent years that may be relevant to our discussion about the Expo.
Thank you. That's a great question. What we've learned about public interactives is, of course, that they are designed experiences all the way down, not only from the content, which is often what people focus on, so the content of wayfinding of an interactive map, but it's not simply the content, right? It's the mode of interactivity, it's the design of the interface, it's the design of the form factor, it's the scale of the kind of piece on offer, the scale that has to bridge between the human body as somebody who's operating an interface to the scale of the story that the designers or the sponsors want told. So understanding it as, as a kind of a designed experience that's different than the kind of designed experience that focuses on a frame, on a computer or on your mobile device, or even an AR, a kind of augmented reality. So the things that we've been looking at are the way in which different kinds of public interactives stage different opportunities for people to have an experience about the bigger story, and the way in which it more or less, different genres, bring the kind of the user's body into the story. And we talk about it as kind of interpolating the subject, right? They're not just bringing their body in, they're actually creating the story about what is your attitude, what is your subject position with that you are supposed to inhabit in relation to the story on offer. Are you an audience member? Are you a citizen? Are you a spectator? Are you a client, a customer, consumer? I don't know if that answered it.
No, that's fascinating. I mean, it's how, you know, all of these, we tend to focus on the technology, but it's really about the people, right? The audience, the participants, and their expectations, their motivations, and you know, what moves them. And so I think what you just said demonstrates very well. I think in the expo context, it's exactly the same dynamics, right? And oftentimes we may forget about sort of designing this, really is designing this immersive experience. What you have to, you know, the person's going to be immersed in, they have to sort of lose themselves in your story, right? Going into the space, but it's easier said than done, you know. But we have seen some pavilions and have done a great job. Others, you know, kind of more still kind of sending you a message, presenting, you know, narratives to you, kind of in a very traditional way.
Yes.
So, Yoel, you talked. I mean, you touched on the Olympics and you know, because our title of the event is called Mega Events, and so these days we can count on fingers, like how many of these mega events are there, right? So Olympics obviously is the one, and of course, you know, we know the difference between the Olympics and the Expo, because the Expo, supposedly we need to, it's not experienced through media broadcasts. The Olympics is primarily, it's a media event, and I'm curious about what you've learned this time in Tokyo, in terms of presenting a mega event, even if it's a media broadcast. In fact, this time, the Dubai Expo has a global media outlet serving as sort of the quote unquote, the broadcaster of that event, which is CNN International. What did you learn, you know, in Tokyo, that you see some of the changes and that you think that it will, you know, last in the years to come, and especially, you know, in what ways they may be relevant to the Expo event?
So the Tokyo Olympics were significantly different than any previous Olympic Games, and as you said, the Olympic Games, especially since the second half of the 20th century, are very much a broadcasted event, appealing to international audiences and stakeholders through broadcasting. I think that what we saw in Tokyo is very little use of in-person initiatives, because usually in the Olympic Games you will have the cultural Olympiad, where you will have different cultural activities where participants, locals, international, engage with. You might had some of that in Tokyo for locals, or might had some of that online. You did not have the, of course, international fans coming, and also the accredited stakeholders that came from internationally were very restricted in their movement due to very strict quarantine and movement regulations. So in that sense, I think that the Olympic movement needs to rethink their in-person diplomacy and in-person initiatives, because I think that this is where the intersection right now between the World Expo and the Olympic movement overlap in terms of the in-person. Also with the Olympic houses, which are kind of like the pavilions in a sense of countries basically renting a hangar or an arena or whatnot, and holding their events where they showcase their food, their music, their products. But again, if you don't have international fans there, you don't have these houses, or you have them in very limited capacity. I think that as we're learning to live with the pandemic, moving to some sort of hybrid way, you will start seeing that again. Not sure if we will see that manifesting in Beijing in the Winter Olympics, but I assume that this will happen in Paris, in LA, and in Australia and Brisbane. in 2032.
Jay, can we ask
Thanks.
you a question?
Sure, yeah.
So I'm interested in your thoughts about the kind of international diversity that is expected kind of on the ground in Saudi Arabia, because you had mentioned that, as well as picking up on your comment about CNN International kind of broadcasting. And I'm wondering about your topic or your concept of nation branding, and if what we might see happening kind of throughout the Dubai Expo is nations having to kind of move into a more obvious kind of way of branding that matches up with the way in, you know, big brands, kind of big consumer brands or service brands. So are we going to see kind of nation branding actually being less soft, perhaps, and more obvious? And that what is also on brand is not only the national identity, but the relationship of the nation to either the host or to other nations. So can you speak a little bit about what you think the process of nation branding is going to play out?
Yeah, thanks. Well, you know, we used sort of the framework, the branding framework, to look at the presentations and also the experiences at the expo. I'm sure, you know, there are other ways, kind of how we sort of analyze the expo. But I have to say, I haven't been to Dubai yet. So, and then I know that because the program was rescheduled, so pavilions, you know, have had to make adjustment changes because, you know, the current conditions. I do think that, as I was speaking earlier, I don't think we don't have like a playbook per se, like, you know, what you need to do that, you know, that will work, right? I think because of the expectations of narratives, I believe have evolved, especially over the last you know, few years, the last decade or so. If you think about, you know, how many people are, you know, on you know, playing games, right? And we have so many screen-based sort of interactions. And so all these things that I think, one thing, you know, and it's so interactive. As an example would be how, you know, the fans of a movie or fans of a celebrity, you know, their interaction with the movies or the celebrities have an impact on, you know, what they will need to present. And the same way how this interactivity has also impacted, you know, any other organizations, how they present themselves. So I think just the way, you know, how these narratives are told have really changed, have really evolved. And I also think that, but those are screen-based sort of interactions, which we'll see a lot at the expo, from the gigantic, you know, cinematic screens to smaller screens. And I'm just kind of curious about the small screens, these interfaces. I'm sure that the pavilions are trying to figure out whether people feel comfortable touching them, or what might be the contactless, you know, kind of interaction that still can have an impact. But I do think that the expo has its sort of unique characteristic, which is it is in person. And I think the screen-based communication, it's really about sight and sound. And currently, I mean, in the future, I'm sure it will also engage other senses of a human body, a person. But the expo it has that capacity to engage, you know, all senses basically, right, of any visitor. So I think that will be interesting to see, you know, how those things are going to be sort of accentuated, because I do believe that people spend so much time on screens that they may also be looking for other things beyond the screen. So I don't know if I answered this question, because but you say, well, what hasn't changed? What hasn't changed is, to me, is that people's expectation of fun and some entertainment, pleasure, some form of pleasure on the expo ground. Yeah, it is educational. We learn about countries and cultures, but I think that aspect is still there, right? And I also think narrative construction, the fundamentals are still there, which is how do we strike a balance between, being credible, being believable, you present things that people kind of recognizes, and you need to surprise people, the novelty effect. And I think that is a constant sort of a dynamic that I think the pavilions will need to sort of address. And despite, we have the new narrative platforms and new narrative formats that's available through a lot of technology. And maybe one more thing, because there's so much this abundance of these formats and stuff, I think people's attention, how to grab people's attention. So there is this, I think there's this need to figure out this attention economy. Like, because it's scarce, right? And I think so the competition may be fiercer, in this kind of environment on the expo grounds. So we have a question. Let me see. I have to put on my glasses to read this. Oh, sorry. So with respect to these pavilions, I think that the pavilions that Anne, you also talked about, you discussed. Do you think there are alternatives to? So just kind of read this very easily. Alternatives to digital media, especially at a time when we are seeing large increase of the negative effects of technologies like social media and other technologies, juxtaposed to the exponential increase of censorship, media, and control. So are there other, like, are we getting back to a healthier medium, B2B in person, as opposed to the digital, as we kind of move in a way that very fast on sort of on the digital front? Any of thoughts from both Yoel and Anne to that question?
I can jump in just really quickly. I think because of that fatigue of the fire hose of social media, I think we'll start seeing more of mass personalization, where things come to us in a more personalized way, so that there's filters and things that kind of take up your interests, so that what comes back to you is really well aligned with what they believe you to be interested in. So I think that mass personalization is technologically enabled, and we'll probably see more of that.
I share Anne's thought here. I think that social media is not going away, but there is a crave for in-person engagement, and I think that we will see these kind of hybrid ways of engaging and connecting between people, between publics.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I guess and you also mentioned that this is going to be the most international if public health conditions continue to improve. We'll have the most internationally diverse audiences on the expo ground. And the interesting thing is that the mobile technologies they'll be using may vary. The platforms they use may vary depending on where they come from, right? Where they're from, and so I think that for us to really understand to what extent we can sort of marry the digital sort of the interaction with the in-person resides in our understanding of the visitors' expectations. And I have a sense that the visitors may have kind of very common expectations, but I could be wrong, just because we've never had a situation like this to have such a diverse gathering of people. And I try to imagine myself, like attending an expo. Typically, you need to wait in line to get into, especially some of these most desired, quote unquote, the most popular ones. And one of the important part of the experience is you stand in line and you talk to people, right? And so in Shanghai, I think it's because primarily, it was Chinese visitors. So just you talk to Chinese people from different provinces. And in Milan, it was primarily visitors from Italy and from Europe. And I think this kind of case that we may end up talking to people from very different regions and backgrounds, and I'm just immensely interested in, especially when you have large numbers of people gathering in this kind of a situation, what kind of a dynamic is going to unfold. And as we talk about public diplomacy, and getting people together, this is really, really the prime moment, right? The most authentic moment to have people together, for which the expo provides a platform, for the world to do that. So there are many more questions I have, as opposed to kind of based on the previous work that we have done, to get a sense of what might be coming up in Dubai. Let me see if we have questions about things. Okay. So yeah. What about here's a question. Let me see the question about, I guess we sort of touched on this in a way, like since so much of everything is digitized, and can an in-person oriented event like the Expo change an image of a country in the minds of foreign public? Any thoughts on that?
I think there's a sense in which it's inevitable that it would change it, because these interactive experiences are scripted to bridge between maybe the official narrative and kind of at least the idealized kind of visitor's profile or the visitor's experience. I think to the extent these kind of experiences digitally mediated make better and better connection to the particular kind of attributes of a user or a viewer. I think the impact, that kind of change, will be amplified. So to address someone through an avatar, for example, that somehow represents your age, your class status, your language community. I think those are the techniques that literally bring people into the story and make the story, comfortable and more familiar. And I can't imagine that wouldn't change an aspect, right? To be in a country that is multilingual, where I can imagine that being that will definitely shift a person's experience of that country in terms of how international it is, or conversely, how closed it is.
Well, I just wanted to ask, since we're running out of time, I also think the Expo we have to look at the Expo as an open-ended kind of project. And as a matter of fact, all public diplomacy activities, I should say all, most of them are open-ended in a sense, because they're no longer self-contained, like there's a program, because of the digital technology that we have, that one thing leads to the other, one thing connects to the other, one thing actually refutes the other. So we have to look at these things as an open-ended kind of engagement. And so the question is, what might be the follow-on activities? So how do we devise strategies between the Expo versus other types of public diplomacy initiatives a country is launching? And I think it is fascinating, but I also just come to think about this, is like, it requires a very different organizing principle. It requires different ways how we organize these things down the road. So we are running out of time. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Yoav, and thanks to our audience for joining us. This is just our very first conversation on the Expo, and during the next 6 months that we'll be hosting other events and discussions surrounding the Dubai Expo, and we hope that you will join us. And please do check out some of the research and commentary the center has developed and curated over the years to providing some context for the discussion analysis of the Dubai Expo. So thank you very much. I hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.